Welcome to the Modern Husbands Podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money in the home as a team. Today we welcome Adam Kol, known as the couple's financial coach. Adam is a certified financial therapist, certified mediator, and attorney with degrees from Duke and NYU Law. In today's episode, we explore the concept of financial intimacy in relationships, emphasizing its importance for couples managing finances together. Adam discusses his book, Financial Intimacy for Couples, which serves as a guide for couples to achieve clarity and teamwork in their financial lives. The discussion covers the role of personal money stories, the dynamics between savers and spenders, and the necessity of open communication to foster empathy and understanding in financial discussions. Adam provides actionable advice for couples to improve their financial conversations and strengthen their relationships. Enjoy the show. We have Adam Kol here with us today, and you just heard his long list of accolades, and it's certainly impressive. I know that I'm looking forward to this podcast, not just because I know it's going to be something our listeners are going to get very much out of, but also I expect to learn something from it. But before we dive in, Adam is a modern husband himself. We both obviously work full time, and we love our sports. We love our fantasy teams, but we also are really proud about the fact that we're the ones who have the flexibility to be, caregivers, lead caregivers, to take the lead on managing the home and still work full time because our wives, are executives and they have big jobs and we're really proud husbands and thrilled to have this conversation with you today. So if you're a listener who falls into the camp of being married to a high achieving spouse that is not just looking for ideas to manage money as a team, but also practical wisdom from guys like us who are kind of living in that world, then you're landed at the right spot with today's episode. So Adam, thanks for joining us today.
Ever since I saw your platform, I was like, this is really neat. And so it's great to be able to be here.
Well, thank you. Well, I want to start with your book, right? It's being released very soon, and I want our listeners to know what's the name of the book and what is it about. What can they expect when they when they purchase the book?
Thank you for the opportunity. So the book is called Financial Intimacy for Couples, as the main title, and the subtitle is How to Achieve Clarity, Teamwork, and Peace of Mind with Your Money. And what you can expect from the book is an A to Z guide on how to get on the same team, on the same page with your significant other around your finances. And that means knowing where you're at financially today, figuring out where you want to get to and having a plan to get there. But alongside that, also, there are a lot of very human aspects to finances, especially in a familial or marital environment. And this book addresses those head on. And it's just created entirely out of my own work and research that I've done as a coach and helping couples navigate tricky situations, from income discrepancies to trust funds on one side or not the other, to growing up different, kind of what levels of wealth or socioeconomic status, and sometimes just different points of view, how to navigate that so that you can have a level of relational harmony that you want to have, but also so that you can rock it financially too, because why shouldn't we have both?
And really, it's financial intimacy that allows couples to be able to work through those differences. But I don't want to assume our listeners know what financial intimacy is. Can you perhaps explain it?
Yes. And, I chose that title on purpose, even knowing that it's not necessarily a widely used term, because my hope is that it becomes a much more widely used term. And it's the idea of intimacy, but having it derived from the way that you handle your finances. Meaning, money is actually an opportunity to work together as a team, which builds intimacy. It's an opportunity to get to know yourselves and each other better, to open up about things that you might feel nervous to share, being honest about your frailties or your struggles or your stresses. And if you can do that in this realm, it makes such a huge difference in terms of the quality of your relationship, but really also the quality of your finances too, because it just makes it, any plan you come up with then is so much more likely to stick, and that will pay serious dividends in the long run in terms of your financial situation.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because financial intimacy is certainly at the core of what is required for couples who do have perhaps like financial trauma in their background or complicated financial circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you said, money is so personal. It's so human. So diving into this a little bit more deeply, what role does financial intimacy play in how couples talk about money?
Yeah. When couples talk about money, usually the immediate temptation, especially if you're feeling anxious or like you're struggling financially, is to try and figure out what we can cut or even how we can earn a few extra bucks. And those conversations are important and valuable. But what about starting by just talking about how your family handled money growing up and how you think that influenced you today? Getting to understand each other more deeply will facilitate better conversation. And so even when things go awry, if you understand each other more, you will hopefully then have more compassion for each other. And the more you know about each other's point of view and each other's backgrounds and traumas and what have you, that's going to allow you to make better decisions, right, about how to approach things. It's like, imagine somebody who grew up really in poverty, and because of that, there's, regardless of one's circumstances, there's many different ways that it might impact you. Somebody in the same circumstances as somebody else, they could still have two very different relationships with money. But let's just say, for argument's sake, someone who grew up poor, and because of that, like the idea of being restricted financially is really stressful for them. Okay, well, if you don't know that and you're just kind of going about it, it's going to seem like they're resisting making any changes or any cuts or trying to be more mindful. And if you understood where it's coming from, then it can allow you to maybe slow down and say, okay, wait, so are there options that might help you not feel such a intense experience of restriction while also tending to our healthy financial situation, right? And then that opens up, okay, so maybe you have a certain amount of money each month that is yours to spend, no questions asked, and we build that in, right? As an example. And, the book really goes into a number of different ideas. And of course, when I'm working with my clients, we'll brainstorm all the number of different ways to achieve whatever it is going to matter to them and help them. So if you can understand yourselves, your needs, your stressors, it's going to help you make a much, much better plan. And then when you are talking about specific numbers or how to cut your expenses, it's just 100 times more likely to stick.
So this, obviously, if you're hearing this, like, this is appealing, right? This is what everybody wants in a relationship. But sometimes the question is like, how do you start? What are the initial steps in creating financial intimacy in your marriage?
Talking, simply put, talking. But about what? About how you relate to money. I mean, some people use the term your money mindset. I use something maybe a little subtly different called your money and relationship story, which is this idea that you have a history with money, whether it was growing up or other points in your life or in other relationships or even at other times in your current relationship. And that's affected you in whatever ways it's affected you. And that all adds up to how you, at least by default, relate to money and handle money. And getting started talking about that, the good news is you're just sharing your experiences. So there shouldn't be too much to argue about there. And sometimes even just having a couple of conversations like that about money that don't lead to conflict and fighting can help regulate your nervous system a little bit, so that
Right.
when you're going to go have your next conversation, you're not already like fighting an uphill battle. But then, like I said, it also has those tangible impacts by helping you understand each other better, be more compassionate, be more aware of your own triggers, and then just having better discussions that come to better conclusions. But if you're like, okay, where within that? My favorite is, how did your parents or caretakers handle money growing up? And how do you think that affected you? And then from there, you can ask really any kind of probing questions about money. Uh, One I ask my clients is, what comes to mind when you think of money? Like super open ended. Or what kinds of messages or narratives have you been exposed to related to your gender or your race or religion or any other kind of pieces of your identity, and how have those affected you? And it really opens up the door to a lot of insight, and sometimes the opportunity to heal even kind of parts of your mindset that are uh, still hurting and in need of some loving attention.
As a Modern Husbands podcast listener, you recognize the importance of evidence-based advice from leading national experts for your marriage. That's why we know you will love our marriage toolkit. Nearly 50 national experts came together to provide bite-sized advice to manage the toughest topics couples face in managing money in the home as a team. Go to modernhusbands.com for your free preview of our marriage toolkit to start, strengthen, or rebuild your marriage. Once again, that's modernhusbands.com to sign up for your free preview of our marriage toolkit. Now back to the show.
Although that explanation was only 3 minutes, the depths of what all of that really means is sometimes hard to wrap your mind around. So I'll give you an example. My money story, most people's money stories derive from their childhood, and for a number of reasons, I'm a tightwad, meaning that I actually, in most, not all, but in most cases, experience actual physical pain when I spend money. I get a headache when I walk into a mall. Not in all cases. Like I'm going to spend money on anything and all things sports related. If I'm going to go, I went to the Ohio State game up in the Smelly House last year in the state up north. I paid a pretty penny for that ticket, and I'll do the same thing when Ohio State makes the playoffs. But for the most part, it hurts. And I'll give you an example. So in the last 3 weeks, our washer and dryer was been the last 6 weeks. There was a pipe that bust in our walls. And so, we have an open ceiling right now because somebody had to repair it. And so there's a $2,500 deductible, and I'm dealing with all these things. I'm responsible for managing it. And then yesterday, we just found out we need a new heater. That's $4,300. $4,400 after the service fee. Had an issue with something that we have outside that was another $1,700. Like this stuff. These are the kinds of things where I know that's just a part of adulting, but I actually get anxiety, true anxiety, even though we have more than enough in emergency savings to be able to manage this. Just moving the money is really hard for me. It's really scary for me. So the reason I bring that up as a story is that my wife and I are financially intimate, but sustaining financial intimacy is difficult if there's somebody in the relationship like me who has a really tough time with opening up a saving or maintaining a certain threshold for savings and actually has to dip into it, where it actually has physical ramifications on me. So how is it that in relationships where there's someone like that, or let's say there's someone who is a spendthrift, meaning that they become so joyful when they spend that they overspend, they spend irresponsibly. How do these types of things, these ongoing challenges, play into what it takes to sustain financial intimacy in your marriage?
Yeah, I mean, they're part and parcel of it. I mean, the best advice I can give is tell on yourself. Just admit
Yes.
it. I mean, and Brian, I mean, I'm very similar to you by default. I was very fortunate in terms of growing up, uh, upper middle class, never wanted, and I had not only my dad would teach me about finance, but my grandfather did too.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of that was that like there was some anxiety in that mix that I inherited from those folks, right, who were teaching me about money, and like some narratives that are kind of like, oh, you're stupid if you make a mistake, if you pay a late fee, if you pay interest, what have you. These kind of ideas. Not that they said that explicitly, but what we communicate even through just tone and body language and
Sure.
implicitly, right? And so I still struggle with that. The only difference now is I have a little bit more awareness of it. And so it's like a week or two ago, we stopped to get some gas and my wife wanted some water and we weren't that far from home. And like, for whatever reason, buying stuff at the gas station in my brain is just like reckless and irresponsible.
Yeah,
And
because you're overpaying
right,
tenfold. Yeah.
right. Now the other side of it is in part why it's like super fun to like stop at the gas station when you're about to go on a road trip and get all kinds of road trip snacks. But she could see that like immediately when she asked me if I could get her a water, I grimaced. And she's super observant. She was like, what was that? Like, what's going on? And she knows that I come with this wonkiness. And so I said, it's just me getting anxious over, spending anything that I feel is unnecessary to spend. And, even somebody who has this, like a similar experience, I think if you're honest with yourself, you see it's not necessarily about the dollar amount always. Sometimes it's just about the judgment about the particular thing you're spending on, like it was in
Yeah.
my case. So I said, no, it's fine. I recognized she wanted like, a $2.50 bottle of water or something. And so I said, don't worry, it's all good. I'm going to get the water. And then when I came back to the car, I had forgotten to get her the water anyway. But it wasn't because of the financial part of it, at least not consciously. I just forgot. But, that telling on yourself, and that at the very least can remind you and your significant other that you're not trying to be a brat or a butthead or difficult. You just have your own stuff. And
Yeah.
if the
Yeah.
more awareness you can bring and acknowledgement of it, that's not to say you don't have any responsibility. Like you can just, crap all over an idea your partner has for something that's going to cost money and do it with impunity. No, but at the very least, it's like to say, my bad, or hopefully, like don't take it too personally if I initially like kind of feel anxiety about something, as you said, right? Like that doesn't mean it's not a
Yeah.
wonderful idea, and it doesn't mean I'm not actually on board with it. It just means I might need a moment to acclimate myself to that idea.
I'm glad that you said just tell on yourself, because that's what I do. I mean, I'm just very open about it. My wife's well aware of my deficiencies, and like there's times where I just tell her, look, I cannot look at anything money related for 3 or 4 days, because it's gonna trigger those pretty destructive emotions. But for the listeners here, I want you to know we didn't plan this. I was getting ready to write a blog post about this at our website, modernhusbands.com. If you are one of the listeners who listen and watch on YouTube, you can see right now a picture of my wife holding a water bottle. And I took this years ago because of how she responded. So, by the way, if you're going to take a picture of your upset wife while she's upset, you better make it worth it, because there's usually a backfire there. But my wife asked for water at a gas station, and I walk in and I do my little unit pricing, and I'm like, well, wait a second here. I can buy literally whatever that is. It's a jug of water, so it's probably at least 2 liters for essentially the same price as a bottled water that has about a quarter of the amount of water. Like, I'm just going to buy the jug of water. And of course, I didn't have a cup in my car, which would have made this a little bit more socially acceptable. But my wife asked for water, and I come back out from the gas station, and there she is holding a giant jug of water, because I just felt like that made financial sense. And I was frustrated about having to spend the same amount of money for 20% of the amount of water. So anyway, I feel you there. There are guys like us out there who exist. So I am going to unshare the screen here in a moment. But while I do, we are on the topic of couples who are savers and spenders. At least we're somewhere near that topic. How can savers and spenders get on the same page?
Be open, be willing to hear their point of view. There's a tendency to, if what your partner is doing is like upsetting you, it's very easy to assume that they're just like out to get you, or they're just being a certain way. And it's not necessarily the case. And, it reminds me, so a while back, I was quoted in a Wall Street Journal article, and it was like by far at the time the biggest like media hit for me. And I spent like probably close to an hour on the phone with the journalist, and she picked one line out of an hour. And when my mom read it, she was so excited, but she's like, huh? Like, that's an interesting line, because it basically said like about, it's easy to assume when you're fighting about money that the other person's just being a jerk. And the journalist used the word jerk in the article. And it was like, I didn't expect to be quoted in the Wall Street Journal using like a kind of, kindergarten playground type of insult, right? A jerk. But I ended up hearing from some people after the fact who really appreciated that, because it's just kind of like, that is plain language, how we can often perceive it. I mean, we might put like a more sharp-tongued phrase in there than jerk, but it's just like, oh, why are you doing this? Come on, like just get over, right? And that, to be able to slow down and remember, they are probably not doing this just to upset you, piss you off.
Right.
Sometimes you just need something that gives you enough space to take a breath, and then you can talk about it like two adults who love each other and have shared goal of like living their best lives and taking care of each other and their family, right? I mean, but you do have to find a way to give yourself enough space to return to that place. And so really talking about it, building your own self-awareness. And there's this idea, I've heard it called like holding two truths at the same time, or something to that effect. This idea that like, it can be the case for me that it makes no sense to like go buy that water bottle at the gas station. And it could be that it makes total sense for somebody else. And that neither point of view it's not like one of those has to be right and the other one wrong. They're just two different points of view. And the more we can allow for that, then we don't have to demonize our partner. But the truth is that oftentimes goes back to our own worries or anxieties or feeling out of control or things like that, which is why building your self-awareness, but also building your financial clarity and having a plan that makes sense to achieve your goals, that also goes a long way, because it gives you something to grab a hold of when the emotions are welling up and threatening to kind of hijack everything.
Yep.
You got someplace to go, just to give you enough room to take a breath and come back to yourself.
I remember reading about the empathy gap a while back, which is essentially what you're saying. It's like, you have these conversations about money, you establish a plan, and then you don't take into consideration the emotions that come with spending decisions. And there's that empathy gap. There's that gap of like failing to recognize how powerful those emotions can be. And it makes it really hard for you to be judgmental if your spouse is spending outside of the parameters of a budget, because you could not at that moment have been in their shoes and recognize that there could have been a strong driver for that is understandable, and that sometimes we have to be empathetic of those choices. We can't always assume that, like you said, they're being a jerk, right? I mean, that's just not accurate. Okay, so we'd love to leave our listeners with one piece of simple and actionable advice that they can walk away with to apply in their lives right now. So based on today's conversation, what would that advice be?
It doesn't have to be as hard as you make it out to be. And if you want to reopen that dialogue, you can just say, if you've been experiencing tension, just go and admit it and say to your significant other, hey, I know we've been having some tension around the money stuff lately, and I'm sorry. And it's honestly a tough topic for me. I'm not exactly sure how to handle it, but I want us to, because I know how important it is to us being able to live the life that we want to live, And so that's an opportunity then to either just hear your partner's response or ask them if they're willing to revisit the conversation sometime soon. And, really just make clear that it's a situation where you both want the same sorts of things. And if you're not succeeding, it's because it's not always easy or straightforward how to succeed in that scenario, but it is possible. And that's really what my book, my work, everything I do is all about, is helping you succeed in those kinds of situations.
And where can people find your book?
Amazon. It's like I said, Financial Intimacy for Couples. If you search that, it will pop up there. And if you want to be kept in the loop as far as I have occasional promotions for the book, you would go to my website, which is couplesfinancialcoach.com, but /book-interest. And that would get you on the list to find out when there's any promos. Otherwise, Amazon's the place to be for it.
Adam, thanks for the conversation today. I learned very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Brian.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow modern husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.